Welcome to this podcast based on Human Capital Institute's Budget to Win, Retain Critical Talent Through Competitive Compensation webcast, sponsored by Hewitt. This event was presented by Ken Abash, Compensation Practice Leader for Hewitt Associates. During this recession, companies need to retain their critical talent more than ever before they get lured away for a bigger salary. Let's have a listen as Ken explains how it all started.
The perfect storm of the economic downturn or the recession that we just came through, and highlight a few things because I think it's important to understand where we are by looking back a little bit from where we just came. And so we just came out of an environment where we saw aggressive risk-taking, financial institutions becoming highly leveraged. We saw losses, for example, estimated at $1.5 trillion worldwide for financial institutions. Falling confidence by investors and depositors, a bursting of the housing bubble. Many of us, unfortunately, have felt that personally. A lot of U.S. consumers living beyond their means. Our indebtedness grew from 60% of gross domestic product to 120% of gross domestic product. And also government and corporate debt grew at the same time from 350% to 350% from 250% of gross domestic product. And all that while the government decided that the prudent thing to do would be to keep taxes low. So that precipitated some of the worst stock market crashes we've seen since the Great Depression, actually the 16th and 21st worst declines ever in the stock market. Demand down for goods and services, tightening credit markets, and the highest unemployment now in 26 years at a rate of almost 9.7%. So here's what the numbers look like across the broader population. So if we look at executives and salaried professionals and salaried non-exempts, and by the way, most of the data that I'm going to share with you today is for salaried exempt professionals only, except for when I show you slides like this one. And we're looking at including zeros. So we're looking at companies that both had increases as well as companies who did not, so the full spectrum of the population. And this is U.S. data primarily. So interestingly enough, for 2009, we saw executives take a bigger hit than the rest of the population. You can see the lower in the organization, the less impact there was. But in 2010, it looks like we're all pretty much in this together in terms of, again, kind of a 2.7% range of increases to base salaries, which is pretty paltry and going to be a huge challenge for us to really enact a pay-for-performance approach this year. Here's what it looks like from an industry standpoint, and what we've done here is highlighted mostly outliers. So if you don't see your industry represented here, you're probably in the middle around 2.7%, which is the number we were just talking about. But the companies leading the pack, energy, food and beverage and tobacco, insurance, pharmaceuticals, many of these are typically leaders in terms of salary progression and salary budgeting. And then you see the organizations who have had a tougher go at it, so industrial machinery and equipment. Automotive is kind of what you would have expected perhaps, and 2.2 is actually an improvement over the kind of year they just had, which was almost around 1% for 2009. So that'll give you kind of a flavor that this isn't an across-the-board type of an outcome. Depending on what industry you're in, depending on what geography you find yourself in, some of the results will vary. And so you can't just generalize here. That's really critical. You need to make sure that you're thinking about this in terms of who your labor competitors are, where they're located, where you're located, and go about it in a very strategic manner. So who did that impact the most? Or if you ask yourself who's likely to get the average highest salary increases, typically it's going to be the highest performers. And likewise, who would you expect to get the average lowest salary increases? That's going to be your low performers. Again, in a kind of a pay-for-performance spirit for how it's supposed to work. Because what we're doing is we're protecting the average performer or average employee, or saying it another way, we're really just kind of spreading what we have across the population, and we're not doing a very good job of differentiating. And in particular, we're really failing at our attempt to provide pay for performance, particularly for the segment of the population who needs it the most, and that is our high performers and high potentials. So just to kind of sum up in one picture kind of what's been happening over the, and it's not just from the last year's recessionary impact, but over a period of time, if we look back, we've seen a dramatic shift in pay mix away from base salary funding and base salary spending to variable pay funding and variable pay spending. And so really we've kind of seen almost a complete reversal of focus here. And so for anyone who, first of all, who doesn't have a variable pay plan, so you just have the blue line on the right there, and you're competing against companies who have all that firepower on top in the 12%. So I'd be worried about that. And in particular, if you're still trying to figure out how to do pay for performance with 1.8% or 2.7%, here's an indication that would suggest that you're probably missing the point by not thinking more directly about how variable pay is going to help you win that battle. Some other responses that we've seen companies take. So we're still going to see some hiring freezes. We're still going to see reduced promotions. That's still a fairly significant development there. But we're not seeing people stretching out the pay periods. We've seen a drop in voluntary unpaid time off from last year, but it looks like it's still certainly going to happen, along with furloughs and mandatory reductions in force. And then the big ticket item here, the big area of focus, is on shift differentials, pay premiums, geographic differentials. So companies are looking very carefully at those and figuring out how do we approach those in a way where they're more cost effective for us going forward. So to kind of wrap this up and then to see what questions might still be out there that we can respond to. So what does this all mean to us, and what do we do about this going forward? Well, so our point of view, Hewitt's point of view on this would be to say that it's unlikely we're going back to the pre-2009 levels of spending on salary increases. And so again, 3% is the new 4%. It's not a happy outcome, but it's the reality of it. And so now we have to figure out what does that mean in terms of, do we try to carve out dollars for our high performers and high potentials, or do we just spread it across the population? Again, we have some points of view about that in terms of what the best utilization of that might be. Differentiating performance with base salary increase is going to be challenging. So, pay for performance is going to be variable pay going forward. And in particular, with the increased coverage of employees and the increased utilization of individual performance, we see that as being the direction that most companies are moving toward as their way of trying to figure out how to accomplish pay for performance. Managing employee expectations is going to be critical. So communications, being transparent, explaining how things work, why certain decisions were made. Particularly if you're one of those companies that cut pay, you're going to find yourself spending a lot of time in this area. Otherwise, you're going to risk some of your best talent walking out the door. And the rest of us are going to have that problem as well, because retaining key employees, and by that I'm really talking about high performers and high potentials, that's going to be a real challenge. And we're going to have to be very creative in compensation to reach out and do what we can to embrace our top performers so that they don't walk to our competitors.